Every map still contains places people avoid, not because they are unmapped, but because something about them makes ordinary life hesitate. These are the stretches where headlights feel dimmer than they should, where the woods seem to hold their breath, and where childhood stories start to feel uncomfortably practical. In this journey across North America, we will move through winter timberlines in the Great Lakes, the farm lanes of Wisconsin, the pine barrens of New Jersey, and the Louisiana bayous that seem to remember promises people break. We will explore 10 encounters and the lessons people say they learned from them. One pattern appears again and again. Sometimes a warning arrives before the disaster, and sometimes the warning is the disaster. Let us begin where hunger learned to wear a face. In many Algonquian traditions, the Wendigo represents more than a monster. It is a lesson about what starvation and greed can do to a person and a community. The figure is described as tall, frost-split, and impossibly thin, with a voice that can imitate someone you love. Elders told these stories to keep families alive during severe winters. You must care for one another, and you must not surrender your humanity to hunger. In more recent accounts, people describe antler-like branches, ribs pressing through skin, and a breath that smells like disturbed graves. Reports from northern Minnesota describe hunters who followed recognizable voices into snow that seemed too undisturbed to be real. In these accounts, there are no tracks leading into the clearing and none leading out. Only a suspicious circle of prints that begin as human strides and gradually lengthen into clawed impressions, almost as if a transformation took place in the same footsteps. One witness from a winter cabin recalled, "I heard him call twice, and then the woods went silent. When I turned around, my own breath felt like it froze inside me." The point of the story is not simply fear. It is a reminder that in a deadly season, the forest may echo with your name, but the voice using it may not be a friend. Along the rural stretch known as Bray Road, drivers began reporting unusual encounters in the late 1980s. They described a muscular, wolf-headed figure that rose from roadkill and stood upright in the glow of their headlights. Law enforcement took statements, local papers recorded the accounts, and a wave of caution spread through nearby towns. Many drivers adopted a simple rule: if you see something by the roadside, do not stop. Witnesses in Walworth County consistently describe a creature that can close distance while upright, touch metal with clawed hands, and leave impressions heavy enough to dent a roof. One driver summarized his experience plainly: it was chewing, and then it stood. I felt the car drop as the roof bent. I did not look back after that. The advice that followed was simple and practical. If something designed to run on 4 legs chooses to meet your eyes while standing on 2, it is time to leave immediately. The legends of the melonheads tend to accumulate near abandoned institutions and forgotten lanes. People describe small, gaunt figures with swollen skulls, and while the details differ, the structure of the stories stays similar. Trespassing on a dare, a cracked service road, the sensation of being watched, and movement in the shadows that never seems to touch the leaves. Witnesses along backroads in Ohio and Michigan recount synchronized shapes that run on all 4s without the usual sound of branches snapping. In several accounts, one figure eventually stands, tilts its head, and appears to study the intruders with attention that feels clinical rather than curious. As one late-night walker put it, "We heard giggling behind us, but the leaves never moved." Whatever it was understood the path better than we did. The lesson here has little to do with monsters and everything to do with boundaries. When a place advertises that it wants to be left alone, it is wise to listen. The reports commonly referred to as the black-eyed children are relatively modern, gaining momentum in the 1990s. People describe gentle knocking in the early hours of the morning, usually around 3 a.m., and 2 children on the porch who speak politely and ask to be let inside to use a phone. The signature detail is simple and chilling. Their eyes are completely black. The atmosphere in these stories changes as soon as the door chain moves. The room becomes colder, the air feels heavy, and electronic devices falter. Witnesses in several New England cul-de-sacs mention the same sequence. The porch light weakens, the pressure in the room increases, and the children calmly insist that they cannot enter unless they are invited. One couple's account is typical. They kept asking to come in, and when we refused, the air became heavy, as if the house itself was holding its breath. The narrative reads like a parable about consent. You can strengthen locks and reinforce windows, but you also need to recognize when the danger lies in saying yes. The Pine Barrens possess a soundscape and mood that feels separate from the rest of New Jersey. For centuries, people in this region have described a winged figure with a goat-like head, hooves, and a barbed tail. The oldest versions frame it as the 13th child of a curse, but later accounts focus on behavior, hoofprints that run up barn walls and end on rooftops that rattle, and treetops that split as something heavy passes overhead. Hunters and hikers in Burlington County report tracks that appear to defy gravity and shrieks that seem to land beside them without leaving a mark in freshly fallen snow. One hunter explained, "There were hoof prints on the roof, but none on the ground. I heard it land, but the snow never showed it leaving." The implication is not proof in a scientific sense. It is pressure. In the Barrens, not every track exists to lead you to a destination. Some tracks exist to convince you that you should not follow. In 1966 and 1967, residents near the old munitions area of Point Pleasant reported a tall, dark figure with wings that seemed too large to belong to any ordinary bird. Engines stalled, radios failed, and an anticipatory quiet settled over the town. Weeks later, the Silver Bridge collapsed into the Ohio River, and many people felt that whatever had been seen beforehand was part warning and part omen. Witnesses in Mason County frequently describe a shadow that keeps pace with a car at highway speed without flapping its wings, and eyes that remain fixed on the occupants through the glass, as if the individuals inside were the phenomenon being studied. One account records, "It paced us without flapping. The eyes were red in the reflection. The engine missed twice, almost like it was afraid to breathe." Whether one believes the figure is a messenger or a monster, the emotional result is the same, a sustained dread that arrives before something breaks and lingers long after. Wetlands provide time for secrets to develop, and Scape Ore Swamp is no exception. In the late 1980s, people near Bishopville described a scaled figure with three-toed tracks that emerged from the cattails. Deputies took casts, television crews came to the roadside, and the local water line seemed to move with a will of its own. Motorists in Lee County reported car doors raked as if by claws and roofs dented twice in quick succession, as though a heavy weight had tested the metal. One teenager remembered, "There were 3 toes, and each print sank as deep as a bottle cap. The roof still has a dent that looks like a knee rested on it." The lesson that residents took from these encounters was straightforward. On low ground, the weather is not the only variable you monitor. You also pay attention to anything that rises out of the water and seems able to remember where you park. In the parishes of southern Louisiana, stories of the rougarou blend French loup-garou traditions with local practices and cautions about oaths, Lenten observance, and lingering after dark. The rougarou is described as a curse that can walk, a person by day and something predatory by night, moving along the cane rows and around the cypress knees with patient familiarity. Field hands along the levees talk about footsteps that match their own and breathing that pauses whenever they stop. One harvest season witness recalled, "It walked when I walked and breathed when I stopped." The cane husks clicked together like teeth. The emphasis here is not just on fear, but on accountability. In these communities, promises matter, and the landscape seems to keep score. By the mid-1990s, accounts of the chupacabra had spread from Puerto Rico through the southern United States. The creature's appearance, varies between dog-like and reptilian, but the reported method stays pretty consistent. Small puncture marks, animals left almost bloodless, and very little sign of a struggle. As the stories moved north, ranchers learned to read the absence rather than the scene itself. Ranchers in South Texas describe tidy tracks that continue cleanly to a fence and then, well, just vanish, as if something had jumped and failed to land again on the other side. They report animals lying still with eyes open and trail cameras that, for some reason, inexplicably fail during the only hour that matters. One rancher explained the dirt looked as if it wept. There were 2 holes and no blood, and the dogs would not go near the gate. Although people can strengthen fences and install more lights, it's difficult to prepare for a predator that appears to leave no evidence of its own movement. In April 1977, several teenagers in Dover, Massachusetts, reported a small, hairless figure with an oversized head and very large eyes on different roads during the same weekend. The hands were described as long and spidery, able to wrap around stones and culverts with an unsettling number of joints. The cluster of sightings ended almost as quickly as it began, which, honestly, made it more memorable, not less. Drivers in Norfolk County consistently described the creature as observant rather than aggressive. It perched quietly, turned its head in a slow, deliberate way, and then descended an embankment with a speed and fluidity that suggested unfamiliar joints. One witness said, "Its fingers wrapped the stones like it had more joints than it should, and the way it watched us made me feel like we were the ones being documented." Encounters like this don't rely on pursuit or violence. Their power lies in the lasting sensation of having been evaluated. When a cry echoes through a forest for long enough, it starts to function like a warning sign. Hikers in the New Jersey Pinelands still talk about trails that end in places where trails just shouldn't go, such as rooftops coated with undisturbed snow. They also describe a collective feeling of being unwelcome, as if the landscape itself were communicating a boundary. One overnight group summarized it simply: "We followed prints until they ran up the side of a shed. After that, there was only the roof, and the strong sense that we were not supposed to be there." In some places, the path exists only to make you reconsider your decision to follow it. Our route through these 10 accounts shows that the details may change, but the rhythm remains familiar. People describe a voice in the timberline that uses someone else's tone, a shadow that keeps pace with a car without beating its wings, hoof prints that ignore gravity, a porch light that suddenly makes a door feel like a liability, and tracks that end precisely where certainty usually begins. Whether we interpret these stories as spirits, predators, curses, or cautionary tales, they all point toward the same practical lesson. When a place feels wrong, that feeling is not decoration, it is information. It is possible to survive by listening to dread when it tells you to leave, to keep driving, or to close the door without apology. And if something knocks at 3 in the morning and asks for permission, the most important question you can ask yourself is simple: does it truly need your consent to come inside?